Imagine flying through a hailstorm of flak at 25,000 feet over Nazi-occupied Hungary. You're piloting a four-engine bomber the size of a small house. Suddenly, boom! The entire cockpit disappears, not damaged, gone. And yet, somehow, you don't crash. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of First Lieutenant Uled Swanson, the only man in recorded history to fly a bomber without a cockpit and live to tell the tale. But before we dive into this story of physics-defying courage, make sure you're subscribed. Stories like this, they only come once in a generation. The Allies were closing in on Hitler's war machine, but the fight was far from over. Deep in enemy territory sat one of the most vital railway junctions of the war, the Varada railroad yards in Budapest, Hungary. To the Germans, this was the aorta of supply lines. Troops, tanks, fuel, everything flowed through it. Disrupt that, and the entire Eastern Front would wobble. The job fell to the 483rd Bomb Group. 60 B-17 Flying Fortresses, massive four-engine bombers, took off from their base in Italy. One of them bore the name MSPA, tail number 4-23210. At the helm, First Lieutenant Uled Swanson. 24 years old, battle-hardened. A farm boy from Michigan who traded cornfields for combat missions. This was his 18th flight into enemy skies. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for this one. As the formation crossed into Hungarian airspace, the calm broke. The sky exploded with black smoke and orange fireballs. Flak. Dozens, maybe hundreds of German 88mm anti-aircraft guns lined the route. Inside MSPA, it was chaos. Every thud and shudder meant another chunk of metal ripped open, another rivet torn free. But Swanson didn't flinch. Neither did his crew. They had a job to do. In the nose of the aircraft, Second Lieutenant Kenneth Dodley lined up his bomb sight. Below, the railroad yards zoomed into view. The crosshairs aligned. He squeezed the release. Boom. Payload away. Target hit. Mission accomplished. Or so they thought. Without warning, a shell tore through the sky. Direct hit. 1 second, the cockpit was intact. The next, it was gone. Not damaged, not splintered. Gone. The nose of MSPA ripped away like paper.
Dodley, the bombardier, was killed instantly. So was the navigator beside him. And Swanson, he should have died with them. Because, along with the cockpit, he lost everything. The flight instruments, the control yoke, the windshield, the pressurized air, the heat. Now he was exposed to negative 30-degree winds, screaming through the open front of the bomber at 200 miles per hour. No pilot had ever survived this, not one. Here's where physics throws up its hands. The center of gravity shifted so violently that MSPA pitched upward into a near vertical climb. At that altitude, in that condition, the bomber should have stalled and spiraled into a flaming freefall. But somehow, Uled Swanson held her steady. How? He didn't use instruments. He didn't even have a cockpit. He used his crew. With blood soaking the floor, smoke choking the fuselage, and panic rising, Swanson screamed above the wind, "Get to the cables." The crew crawled through the wreckage and gripped the exposed control cables, the wires that linked the pilot's controls to the plane's control surfaces. Then, based on Swanson's shouted commands, they began flying the plane by hand. Yanking cables, adjusting ailerons, pulling rudder lines. It was like trying to play a symphony while the piano was on fire and falling out of the sky. And somehow, it worked. Another B-17 in formation, nicknamed Ivan, saw the blood-soaked MSPA limp into view. The crew couldn't believe what they were seeing, a bomber with no nose, no cockpit, flying as if it were whole. Inside MSPA, the situation was growing worse. A second flak hit destroyed engine number 2. Smoke, fire, more drag, less power, the plane began to lag behind formation. A death sentence in hostile skies. For 10 agonizing minutes, the crew flew blind, bleeding, and frozen. Each second they stayed airborne was borrowed from death. Eventually, Swanson made the call no pilot ever wants to make. Bail out now. One by one, the surviving crew jumped from the ruined fortress, but Swanson stayed behind. Someone had to keep MSPA steady while they escaped. He held her level, alone, inside a dead aircraft flying on pure willpower. Only when the last man jumped did he grab his chute and head for the open hatch. But then, disaster. The dying bomber pitched violently upward. Centrifugal force slammed Swanson against the interior. He was trapped. MSPA began her final stall. The air went quiet. Then, Swanson jumped. His parachute snagged on the jagged remains of the cockpit. The nylon ripped violently, and in a strange twist of fate, it saved him. The damage separated him from the aircraft, hurling him away just before MSPA broke apart. He blacked out at 20,000 feet. Swanson regained consciousness during freefall. The earth rushed up to meet him. His parachute was shredded.
He had seconds to live. Then he saw trees, a dense forest below, a glint of barbed wire, a POW camp. He aimed his body toward the treetops and braced. The forest broke his fall, but not gently. He crashed through branches, smashing a leg and slicing himself open, unconscious again. The next thing he saw were German boots. Enemy medics rushed to his aid. They saved his life. In one of the war's strangest ironies, the enemy became his salvation. But that wasn't the final miracle. When Swanson was carried into the POW camp, he looked around in disbelief. His entire crew was already there. All 7 had survived their jumps. All 7 had been captured nearby. By sheer luck, fate, or divine design, they were all reunited. They had flown the impossible together. Now they would endure captivity together. For 9 long months, through the brutal winter of 1944 to 1945, they survived as prisoners of war. Then, April 30th, 1945, American forces liberated the camp. They were finally free. After the war, Uled Swanson was promoted to lieutenant colonel, but he didn't chase medals. He went home to Michigan, married his sweetheart Catherine, raised a family, built a quiet life. But once a year, his crew would reunite, old warriors with weathered hands and sharp memories. They'd share a drink, laugh at how young and dumb they were, and remember the day they flew without a cockpit. When word of what happened reached military circles, it became legend. Aviation historians called it the most improbable act of airmanship ever recorded. Engineers ran simulations. They said what Swanson did was physically impossible. Modern pilots, when told the story, laughed, until they saw the logs, the photos, the after-action reports. This wasn't a myth. It really happened. Today, in aviation museums around the world, Swanson's story is told not just as a war story, but as a monument to human will, to leadership, to sacrifice, to the raw, stubborn refusal to die when the universe says you should. Swanson passed away on February 28, 2009, at the age of 89. But in the skies over Hungary, somewhere above the clouds where physics failed and courage took the controls, his story still flies. What did you think of Uled Swanson's unbelievable flight? Let us know in the comments. Smash that like button, subscribe for more true stories of human defiance, and as always, keep exploring the extraordinary.